Hey everybody, welcome back to our final episode. We're happy because all of you guys have listened to all those, but it's sad because it's coming to an end.
Yep, really sad.
But everything that's good comes to an end, right, boys?
Yeah, it is true.
So we really want to thank all of you, our listeners and our viewers, for our videos that we made also. We want to thank all of you. You guys have been so supportive. You guys have followed. You guys have reposted what we've done, all of our hard work. It's not for us. We really want this information to get passed along because it's just so many good things that we've talked about that we know can be useful into people's lives. So we really, really, really appreciate your guys' input, your feedback, what you guys have said to us, your comments, your posts, your retweets. We really appreciate it all. We have a couple of things of like what we've learned throughout this process and throughout these podcasts that we're going to talk about. But again, we really want to reiterate how thankful we are to our guest speakers, to you guys, our listeners, because without you guys and without our speakers, none of this would have been possible. So we really, really, really appreciate it. But again, we're going to talk about a couple of things that we learned. What do you think, Jeremy? What are some things that you've learned through this process and through these podcasts and what you've heard from our guest speakers and the questions that have been given to us by our listeners and our viewers? What is something that you've learned or some things that you have learned?
Yeah, so the one thing that, just to clarify, that this podcast was made to to equip and establish a culture of worship for today's generation. And one thing that really caught my attention was what Naya Cotton said. And if you guys just want to go back to that episode, I think it's episode 4, and we're talking about relevance. And the first question I asked her is, what's the relevance of worship in church, and how do you get people to relate to worship in church? And the thing that she said was that it's not so much about how people are going to relate to you. It's not so much about how worship needs to sound to a person's ear or look to a person's eyes, but it's so much about the posture of worship. And I think that's super important, because there's so many bands coming up, and yes, they sound good and they sound amazing, they look amazing, but at the end of the day, we forget so many times about what worship in the end game really is. Worship is about the Father. Worship is about connecting to the Father's heart. And she just kept on talking about, when it comes to relevance, it's about getting people to understand what worship is. Because when you can get people to understand the posture of worship, and you can get people to really understand why we're doing this, then relevance will come just automatically, just from there. So I think if there's one thing that I'm pulling out from this entire podcast, was really that, about what she said. And yeah.
Wow, that's so good. Should have had a video for you. That's a really good one. Yeah, guys, so everything that he pinpointed there, it's just so true. Guys, go back and listen. Even if you've listened to it already, go back and listen to it, because it's a really good podcast.
It is really good.
What about you, Gustavo? Anything that you have?
Yeah, actually, so it's funny. So part of our mission statement is developing a culture. Some people don't even understand what we mean by that. Like developing a culture is like making sure that the church or the ministry you're in is like you preach so much to them, or you give them, you pass down the information so much that it starts becoming a natural thing within the ministry or the church. So actually, one thing I took and from my part is actually, so coming from like a Brazilian background, I've mentioned this in one of our podcasts too. It's like unfortunately we're really unprepared. Like our lack of preparation is like, it's just a Brazilian thing. We say it. We actually have a phrase to explain like our Brazilian way. Jeitinho brasileiro. Like we always. It's like making amends. Like we always just make amends. Like things are broken, we like find a way to make it work, And I think that's a horrible way to go about, especially in the church, because we need to give our best, our time, invest our resources. So one thing I took was actually from Roberto's podcast. So when you develop a culture in a church, it functions a lot better than making amends, you know. So yeah, that's actually what I took from it, you know, just to teach people that that to be excellent has to be a part of their DNA, you know, because that's what
good. That's so good.
That's what was taught to us. So yeah.
Wow. I mean, just seeing the different perspectives and backgrounds. We mentioned it before that you would see that in this podcast, just different backgrounds and perspectives and viewpoints of what we're talking about throughout these podcasts. But to hear it from just this little group that we have, it's pretty incredible to see within ourselves what we've learned in this journey that we're walking through. Felipe, do you have anything?
Well, I think what's incredible, the whole season for this podcast was amazing.
That's true.
Yeah,
because
so
every episode I was just like, I was recording most of it on my computer and I had my mouth open just like, oh my goodness, that was so good.
Yeah.
True.
And I think like Gabe, I read his episodes were really incredible because he was talking about honoring and obedience and how it's important on a worship team, a place that usually like a lot of people put pride in front of a lot of things, even before people. And the way he said about honoring not just your leadership, but also like the Lord with it. So you can put him in front of everything that you're doing and your focus is on him. And when you do that, everybody follows up with you, and you are under the authority that God wants you to be. Yeah. So for me, that's incredible. Also, Laura talking about identity and how to recognize your worship team and identity, not just like musically, but also spiritually. It's incredible. When you take place in the position that God wants you to be, they're going to shift the atmosphere for whatever God wants to do in that church or in their environment. That's incredible.
Wow. Yeah. Me personally, I think from all of these podcasts, I would just take pieces from each because I can't pick one off the top of my head that I can.
Good.
Yeah. We've had a lot of power hitters come in and speak on our podcast, and it was just such a blessing to my life, and I know to the listeners' lives. So again, we want to thank all of our speakers, Mike Massa, Gabe, Laura. We want to just thank all of you guys, Roberto, Danton. We just, all of you guys for coming out and just taking from your time to help us establish a culture of worship for the next generation and to help us see your viewpoint and your background of what worship is to you guys. And to the viewers and the listeners, again, thank you for everything. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. And if there's anything that you guys have, any comments, anything, if we were to do another podcast, what would be some questions? What would be some things that you guys would want to listen to? You guys are important to us, so we want to know from you guys what's important to you guys. What are some questions that you might still have? What could we reiterate that we already talked about? What are some other focus or viewpoints that we could have? And again, thank you guys. Thank you so much. We love all of you guys.
DM us on Instagram.
Yeah, definitely. Follow us. Comment on our post, everything.
We love you guys. Thank you.